our next presenter is Paul Spiteri. And are you waiting? Oh, sorry. Paul has, as he said, is on his second career. He told me the other day, and he's going to give us a slightly different version of Richard Burton, his reading of Burton's lives and Burton's other lives. So, thank you, Paul.
Hello. First off, I'd like to thank Nick for inviting me to speak here today. I should say I'm not really a Burton scholar, but rather someone who's admired the man for a long time and marvelled at his adventures. Rather than talk about his adventures that we all know about, I'm going to really focus on how certain fiction writers, all fans of the great explorer, made Burton a protagonist in their own stories and what might have impelled them to do so. Like many here, I'm sure, I first learned of Burton at school. I remember a project on Africa that took a whole term at junior school. Burton was mentioned among many other explorers, but something must have stuck in my mind when it came to Burton. Fast forward 5 or 6 years and I was amazed and immensely pleased when Burton turned up as a major character in To Your Scattered Bodies Go, a science fiction novel by the brilliant writer Philip Jose Farmer. Scattered Bodies was the first in the Riverworld series of novels and short stories, and I'll talk a little bit more about that series in a short while. Farmer greatly admired Burton, and his name is mentioned in passing in many of his other books. In fact, Farmer wrote a short but complete biography of Burton in 1953, which was unpublished until 2006 and then again in 2020. For both of those printings, I was the editor. In fact, that is how I got to know Nick. He wrote a brilliant introduction to the 2020 edition. I think it was in the pub after the Torquay conference that I mentioned to Nick that it might be an interesting idea to look at other incarnations of Burton. I was certainly thinking of Farmer's Scattered Bodies here. And when I indicated I was coming to Vienna, it was Mick who encouraged me to present on this subject. Initially, I started by looking for any piece of fiction which Burton had a role. Of course, there were a lot, and I would need much more time than I have here to even list them. So I gave myself a few parameters. I would focus on those stories that are truly fictional and not necessarily hidden adventures. Some of these adventures are really quite fantastical, as I'll try and illustrate. Those that place Burton outside of our world and into totally alien settings, and I'll explain a bit more about what I mean in a little while. And I was going to try and avoid anything that is a fictional account of adventures that we know Burton had, though this did prove a little bit tricky, as we'll see. Of course, rules are just guidelines, and I reserve the right to break my own rules, and I will. I'd also like us to consider why so many creators used Richard Francis Burton as a character in their books, and why sometimes in such fanciful plots as well. So I haven't read all the books I'm going to talk to you about today, so I've had to use my Google foo a little bit to get some of the information for the presentation, but I did want to try and talk about and focus on what I think are the most interesting examples, subject to time, of course. Pulling this presentation together has certainly sparked an interest, and I think it's something I'm probably going to persevere with. It feels like we need a bit of a classification of Burton appearing in fictional environments. So I'm going to focus on truly original Burton lives initially, and particularly those created by two novelists. Let's start with my absolute favourite, the aforementioned Philip Jose Farmer's Riverworld series. There he is. The Riverworld story takes place on a mysterious planet called Riverworld. The most distinctive feature of this world is a winding, seemingly endless river that flows across its entire surface. Beyond the shores of this river is a seemingly endless range of mountains. So if you can imagine, wide river, plateau where everybody is, and then mountains are kind of boxes then in. Almost every human being that has ever lived on Earth from Neanderthal era onwards is resurrected simultaneously along the banks of this river. Each individual wakes up young and in good health. I think listening to Martin's talk earlier, that would be something that Burton would be particularly pleased at, and seems to be about 25 years old. Everyone starts with a metal canister, referred to as a grail, that provides 3 meals a day and other basic necessities. The central mystery of the series is the origin and purpose of Riverworld. Who has created this place, or why have all of humanity's deceased been brought to life here? Farmer uses this premise to introduce many characters from history. For example, Mark Twain, Cyrano de Bergerac, Jack London, and King John of England, to name just a few. But principal among them is Richard Burton. Burton is the main protagonist in a series of 5 books. This is Burton the explorer, the linguist, the soldier. But as we would expect, Burton has been singled out by those behind the creation of Riverworld and is driven, more than most, on this supposedly utopian planet to investigate and uncover the mystery behind mankind's resurrection. And this he does. There's no hanging at the end of this series, we find out. The adventure starts in the novel To Your Scattered Bodies Go. And yes, I am using an animation to scatter those book titles. The story is told in 5 novels, several short stories written by Farmer himself, and there are 2 books of short stories by other authors but set on Riverworld. Another remarkable feature of Riverworld is that if you die, you are resurrected the next morning along a random part of the river. Burton uses this to his advantage and boards the Suicide Express, as it is called, to try and get to the headwaters of the river, where he expects to find answers. This doesn't quite work out as he would like, and he has to draw on more traditional methods of transportation and the help of other denizens to make his way up the river. Along the way, Farmer interjects much about Burton's earthly life, as he does to a lesser extent other characters. And even if you're not a science fiction reader, the series really does have a lot to offer. Farmer knows his history and is able to bring his characters to life. Farmer was also a student of religion and philosophy, and this comes through strongly in his writings. The Riverworld series is full of big questions and does provide us with a scientific mechanism for an afterlife. If anyone is interested, I do have a few copies of the Riverworld book, the first 2 novels in the series, and also the aforementioned biography that Farmer wrote of Burton. Okay, let's move on and talk about Mark Hodder. He looks a bit menacing there, I think. Really, in life, he's a very affable chap. So I think we'll move on to that one. This is the only image I could find of him smiling. It's not great resolution, which does make me think that Mark prefers the more demonic look. I don't know if that reminds you of anyone. Incidentally, Hodder did provide an excellent introduction to the Rough Night for a Queen book that I mentioned earlier. Mark is most famous for his Burton and Swinburne series, a collection of steampunk novels where Burton and the poet Algernon Charles Swinburne team up and find themselves entangled in various fantastical mysteries and conspiracies. These novels depict an alternate world where Queen Victoria was actually killed in the assassination attempt of 1840. In fact, in our timeline, the 1840 attempt was the first of 7 that occurred during her reign. In our history, the would-be assassin, Edward Oxford, shot at but missed the Queen. As a result of this unexpected assassination in this timeline, the timeline is altered. Based on a complex constitutional revision, Albert is declared king in her place, and Britain's history is rewritten. By the 1860s, some 20 years later, British engineers have transformed the landscape with bigger, faster, noisier, and dirtier technological wonders. Eugenicists have developed specialist animals to provide unpaid labour. Libertines oppose the restrictive and unjust laws and flood the country with propaganda, demanding a society based on beauty and creativity. Burton finds himself sucked into this perilous society and is tapped by the Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, who employs him as the King's spy. This becomes a very different version of Burton. He does not marry Isabel, nor go on to be part of the many events we know him to be famous for. Hodder maintains many of Burton's real-life characteristics, his bravery, intellect and curiosity, and what we get are a series of well-written, ingenious, grand adventures. Somewhat fantastical, but which absolutely channel. I think that's your phone.
I'm 45, so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I thought I turned it off.
So what we get is a series of well-written, ingenious, grand adventures, somewhat fantastical, but which absolutely channel the spirit of the Burton we've read so much about. I would certainly highly recommend the series. Interestingly, in The Secret of Abdul el-Yazdi, in the bottom left-hand corner, Burton is killed early on in the novel and is resurrected, which I think is a nice link back to the way Farmer treated Burton. Okay, other examples. Numerous examples exist of Burton being a major or a minor fictional character in some wonderfully inventive stories. I haven't read all of these, and I'll kind of explain why as we go through them, but these look the most interesting, so I'm relying a little bit on online sources, which I'll quote from. First, Shadows Through Time, The Fantastical Adventures of Sir Richard Francis Burton. This is a collection of novellas that I must admit I am slightly hesitant to read in their entirety. The blurb says, Burton travels back in time aboard Captain Nemo's wondrous Nautilus to discover the frightening origins of a spreading worldwide madness. He faces a terrifying invasion by alien beings from prehistory and takes a dangerous trip through time to stop a madman from rewriting all of human history. While on these journeys, Burton will match wits with the likes of Mycroft Holmes, encounter the infamous Professor Moriarty, and meet Ian Fleming and Alistair Crowley. The blurb enticingly then says, and so much more. And I suppose I should just bite the bullet and bite the book. The Map of Time, originally written in Spanish by Felix Palmer. Haven't been able to read this one yet, but it does seem a lot more intriguing and well written from the bits I've managed to actually read online. Again, I'm relying here on some blurb. Burton is involved with Murray's Time Travel, a Victorian era company that claims to offer journeys to the future. This enterprise, capitalising on the Victorian era's fascination with time and science, is at the heart of the novel's events. There were two further books in this series, A Map of the Sky and The Map of Chaos, but I'm not sure if Burton features in those at all. Area 51, series by, well, it's actually Bob Mayer. Though not one of the primary characters in the series, Burton plays an important historical role in the Area 51 series of books by Bob Mayer, written under the pen name Robert Dougherty. The hero searches for parts of a lost manuscript among those supposedly destroyed by Isabel that the explorer has hidden around the world whilst on his travels. Burton features most prominently in the novel in the series called The Sphinx. You can see up there. The story features a dormant alien ship in Earth's orbit, a group of alien-human hybrids, and a satellite array bristling with nuclear missiles. Their quest leads them deep into a deadly maze within the Great Sphinx of Giza, and their search for the legendary Ark of the Covenant. You've got to love copywriters in their blurbs. And just look at that cover. I mean, whoever designed that, it's a good talking to, in my opinion. Okay, The Aleph by Jorge Luis Borges. I love this story. I reread it recently before I came here. The Burton link is very small, but I couldn't resist including an author of this calibre. In this short story, Borges reveals that a manuscript written by Burton was discovered in a Brazilian library. The manuscript talks of mirrors, alephs, in which the whole universe is reflected. The aleph being a point in space that contains all other points, and anyone who gazes into it can see everything in the universe from every angle. Burton has identified a number of these mirrors through his research. For example, Merlin's universal mirror from Spencer's Spiteri, Queen Book 2. Lucian of Samosata refers to it in his True History, and there are other examples. Okay, breaking my rules definitely here, but I just felt there were a few honourable mentions that I needed to cover off very quickly. So these are more traditional fictional versions of Burton. There's The Bookman's Promise by John Dunning, great book. Janeway buys a copy of a rare Burton book. There are elements of Burton all throughout it. Great story. If you're interested, there are, I think, 3 or 4 other, there are 4 other Cliff Janeway novels, and they're all excellent. 5 Weeks in the Balloon. Burton and his partner Speke are currently mentioned in the novel 5 Weeks in the Balloon, one of Jules Verne's Voyage Extraordinaire. This was Verne's debut novel, and he would join Burton on his journey to the source of the Nile. Flashman series, I'm sure many people here will know the Flashman series. Burton appears in a number of those. And The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton by Walter Bosley. Bosley speculates on the missing 6 months in the life of Sir Richard Francis Burton whilst he was in Brazil, and how that might have led to the search for the lost city of Z that Percy Fawcett then launched an expedition for. Okay, moving on to other media. Comics. The Adventures of Luther Arkwright by Brian Talbot. While not the main character, Sir Richard Francis Burton plays a crucial role in this graphic novel. Luther Arkwright, the protagonist, is involved in a multi-dimensional battle against a puritanical empire. I remember reading this in the late 1970s, and the storytelling and the art is absolutely amazing. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, most people will probably recognise it from the film, but there were a series of graphic novels first by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill. Expansive Universe, Burton is reimagined in an alternative history setting. He's shown to have various adventures that blend his real-life achievements with fictional events and interactions. Changing again to film. Riverworld, I mentioned it earlier on. There have actually been 2 attempts to film Riverworld, both as pilots for proposed TV series. Neither came to fruition. To be honest, neither of the movies were particularly good, and Burton doesn't even feature in the first one. And Burton in the second movie is not the hero we've known him to be. So, interesting, but not great. There's talk of a 3rd attempt, and fingers crossed. Okay, Zero Patience. Burton is described as having had an unfortunate encounter with the Fountain of Youth, and is living in present-day Toronto as a chief taxidermist at the Natural History Museum there. This is a story about the early days of the AIDS epidemic, with Burton developing an exhibit for his Hall of Contagion at the museum. I guess you'd call it a fantastical comedy romp with songs. Not a great movie, and I think people here would not recognise the protagonist as the Burton we know, but it's fun, and I quite enjoyed the songs, especially the one featuring talking anuses, well, singing anuses. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody seen the film? Well done.
You might remember it.
Okay, that's really the end of my presentation, but I'd like really to refer back to the question I posed at the beginning. What is it that makes creators want to use Burton as a protagonist or as a significant element in their work? All I have is my own view, and that is Burton led an amazing and full life. And this is the last group I think I need to explain that to. And we want more. One lifetime for someone like Burton just isn't enough. in the way that Sherlock Holmes readers pretty much forced Conan Doyle to bring back his hero after he had ostensibly died at the Rickenback Falls. We want more adventure stories, and so further adventures and hidden adventures were created. And seemingly these escapades were even more enormous and mind-blowing than those we know he had. I'm sure these extensions of Burton's life aren't necessarily to everyone's taste, but I've certainly loved them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think it certainly shows, doesn't it, when people say an icon is something that we project our fantasies and ideas upon, that this the ability to keep doing that with Burton's life is remarkable. So thank you very much.